Carl Shakura, CCI.
First. Hello?
Hello.
Oh. Good evening. Oh, no, that's not it yet. That can't possibly be. Hello. Hi.
Go to speaker view, folks, if you want to see the slides coming up.
How do you do that?
Upper right.
Where it says view.
Don't have that.
Wait, can we mute everybody?
Sí.
If you're on a phone, just keep swiping left until you find the program.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. I have to say that no matter how many times I speak before a group online in our current reality, it will never cease to not feel a little strange. So I always feel like when I first open up the first minute, it's a little bit surreal here. So thank you. Thank you for being with us tonight. But in these moments where our very survival requires that we be apart, I'm filled with gratitude that as we have for many years here at CCI, we can still gather together as a community, even if only virtually tonight. The hugs will have to wait until we can safely gather again. I attended my first Drylongso in November of 2013, which was both our 45th anniversary event and the 90th birthday of our founder, Horace Selden. I had just been hired as the executive director, though I would not start until the following January. I was in attendance to be introduced to the CCI family, as well as to become acquainted with our community. There was one remark from that evening that has always stayed with me, and it was something that Sue Neymark, our outgoing board chair, said. She told me that night that CCI was a scrappy little organization, but we always cleaned up well for Drylongso. Let me just tell you that over the past 7 years, I can attest to that. CCI is indeed a scrappy little organization. And in the last 7 years, while we still maintain the soul of a scrappy little organization, we have also grown up. Tonight's virtual event will speak to the many ways in which we have grown as we showcase our core programs, the Anti-Racism Organizing in the Suburbs Project, also known as ARROS, as well as the Racial Healing Project. If you were able to join us at 6:30, you may have had a chance to see the work of some of our partners as well. And if you didn't, that's fine, because at the conclusion of the main program at 8 o'clock, you can join one of our virtual studios to see the work of Knapsack, WPCR, and Surge, as well as some of the extra fun offerings, including the virtual mixologist space. Before we begin, though, tonight, I want to acknowledge the moment that we're in. 2020 has been a year like no other year that any of us have ever seen. It was on Friday, March 13th, that I left our Boston office after having made the decision to shut down our office until early May. Like many people at that time, I assumed that whatever we were about to face with COVID would be a blip, a momentary disruption. I told the staff to take a week or so off so that I could regroup. By early April, the board and I met and we realized that we would need to move to a plan B. As an organization, we made some strategic shifts, including having Mirna Morales, our program director, who had been planning to return to CCI this fall to work on the racial healing project, returned earlier so that we could push up the timeline on that project. Fran Smith, our Arrows project manager, also had to pivot this year to create virtual space for the Arrows programming. Then, in the midst of rearranging our programming year to deal with the impact of the pandemic, two things happened. In May, my father suffered a massive stroke, and I had to take an immediate leave of absence to fly home to be with him in his last days, and George Floyd was killed. As we know, the killing of George Floyd led to a global response, the likes that has never been seen before, an uprising. People from all walks of life, from every corner of this country, took a stand to say that Black lives matter. Despite being in the middle of a pandemic, people took to the streets. There was a day when my father was dying that I could not get to his hospice facility because the crowds in Chicago had become so massive that the mayor blocked off entry points to downtown Chicago. I've attended protests of all sorts for over 30 years, but what I witnessed personally in Chicago in May and in June, along with the responses that I was reading about both in Maine and in Boston and all over the country, could only be described as an uprising. It was in that moment that I knew this year we must gather, as we've always done, as beloved community, if only virtually. CCI celebrated its 52nd year a few months ago. And in a few minutes, you're going to see a brief video that speaks to our history and our founding, where you will see our origin story as an organization, and you will see how much the origin story that we were a part of has been mirrored in this very moment. It was through the racial protest of 1967, the Kerner Commission report's findings, and the overall racial mood that led Horace Seldon to start CCI, as he understood as a white man that he had to do something. At that time, his action was considered radical. And yet, after 52 years, we now know that anti-racism work requires boldness and relationships. And it is in that same radical spirit that grounds us as an organization at this moment. When we recognize that anti-racism work requires creating multicultural and multi-class coalitions of people who understand that the work is raggedy and that the collective liberation of all humans is tied to the liberation of Black and Brown people. It is in that spirit tonight we honor all who have shown up to rise up against the forces of white supremacy and fascism this year. We honor all who know that anti-racism work is life work, and it is the work of the heart. That the progress at times will be slow because we are literally changing the operating system of our nation and our culture. Our work is a process. It is a journey. It will change you, and it will not make you popular around the virtual holiday table this year, and that's okay. I hope that tonight's gathering leaves you feeling on fire and inspired to go deeper into your anti-racism praxis. I hope that you are inspired to support the work of CCI, as we will need your support now more than ever so that our vision of change can reach many more. The video that you are about to watch, as I said, it's going to give you our origin story. And while our beloved Horace is no longer with us, you will see what led him to create this organization that I am proud to serve. As well as learning more about our earlier work, we're also going to take you on a journey tonight of CCI's evolution and uprising over the last 52 years. I also want to give, before we go to the video quickly, I want to give a quick thank you to our event sponsors who made it possible to not only offer this event this year, but to ensure that the cost would not be a barrier to anyone wishing to join us tonight. I want to thank you. I want to send a thank you to our partner volunteers tonight for participating. I also want to thank our event planning committee and our co-chairs on that committee, Betsy St. Ange and Johnny Lapham. I also want to say thank you to Danny Johnson and her event production team at a special gathering. And I also just want to add that tonight's production was created by a special gathering, which is a Black-owned woman firm that does virtual events. So keep that in mind if you find yourself needing to put on a virtual event anytime in this current new world that we're in. And now I'm going to present you with the first film vignette. Thank you.
(1967). Detroit is burning. President Johnson orders an investigation to find out why. The Kerner Commission concludes that the riots in Detroit and other American cities are rooted in the white problem, institutional racism. Soon after the report is published, Martin Luther King is assassinated. 1 week later, Horace Seldon, a minister and activist in Massachusetts, is driving home after preaching an Easter morning sermon, and he has an epiphany. He must devote his life to work against white racism. Community change is born. Its core principles: challenge white supremacy. White people need to work with other white people. Follow the leadership of people of color. And provide support for activists and organizations of color, money, meeting space, connections, whatever is needed. CCI stepped in to support Boston's movements, from the struggle to desegregate the Boston public schools, to the role of white-led institutions, to global protest movements, to local community trainings and actions. For decades, CCI has helped to build and strengthen the anti-racism community in Boston. Horace Seldon and Paul Marcus, a successor as CCI executive director, taught a Boston College class on the history of racism in the U.S. for 14 years. Many of their students were inspired to become activists. And CCI's lending library and brown bag lunches made the office a watering hole for people to learn and socialize and connect. And CCI honored the ordinary people doing extraordinary things to combat racism with the Drylongso Anti-Racism Leadership Awards, which became an annual community celebration. In 1969, a white person starting an anti-racist organization was a radical act. Horace left us in 2017, but we honor his vision by continuing to act boldly under Stewart-Bouley, the first Black woman to lead CCI. As more and more people join the uprising against white supremacy, community change is envisioning new ways to help bring liberation to us all.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paul, he and his pronouns, and I'm a former community change board member and a former student of both Horace and Paul. And I want to quickly just mention that I am trying to channel Horace tonight by wearing one of the sweaters that was given to me after his passing a few years ago. And that just reminds me of him quite a bit. And after seeing that video in particular, just miss many of you in this community. So 18 years ago, as a college sophomore, I walked into a course titled The History and Development of Racism in the United States of America, or HDR for short. At the time, I had no idea how profoundly that course would shift the direction of my life. All I knew was that it was a course that was widely popular and nearly impossible to register for any student not in their senior year. Over the course of that semester, Horace Seldon, CCI's founder, as you all know, and Paul Marcus, the longtime executive director of CCI, helped me see things about the history of the United States I was not taught throughout all of my years of schooling. In short, they helped change the lens through which I viewed this country. And more importantly, they helped me challenge how I thought of myself and my role in this country. By the time I took HDR, Horace had already been teaching the class for 20 years, 40 consecutive semesters. Horace and Paul had collectively taught the course to thousands of students. I think about their collective impact often, and I wonder if I have done enough with my thoughts, my words, and my actions to live up to their example of being active anti-racists. It took me about a year to come back to HDR as an undergraduate teaching assistant because I needed that time to work on my own racial identity development and through all of the pain, anger, and frustration I felt after seeing our country for what it is and not as what I was taught it was in school. I did return to HDR, and it was over the next few semesters that I got to know both Horace and Paul as mentors and friends. Earlier this morning, I shared with my son that Horace means more to me than my own biological father, and I was not exaggerating. Horace and Paul will forever be an inspiration to me and to so many others. Thankfully, my story did not end with my involvement with HDR. Shortly after I started teaching the class with Paul in 2006, I was asked to join the board at CCI, and I jumped at the opportunity to be a part of an organization that meant so much to both Horace and Paul. As a young man, I wanted to help CCI grow and be a beacon for active anti-racists throughout the greater Boston area. I felt strongly, and still very much do to this day, about CCI's unique perspective, which is still sadly the case of the quote unquote race problem in the United States, or as we just heard, the white race problem. And I felt that there was critically important work that white folks, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color communities needed to be doing to not only mitigate the harmful, deadly impacts of racism, but also work to reform institutions and catalyze more equitable outcomes in our system. The work was incredibly important 52 years ago. It was important in 2006. It's critically important now, and I know it'll be critically important for generations to come. Horace, Paul, Susan, and so many of you who have been a part of the CCI community are all part of the uprising. You're all the change makers. So we as a country and as a global community need to make a positive difference in the world. As Horace and Paul used to say in HDR, and as people like Ibram X. Kendi are saying right now, one either allows racial inequalities to persevere as a racist or confronts racial inequalities as an anti-racist. There is no safe in-between space of not racist. So my parting thought to you is, how will you choose to act? Thank you.
If racism is a white problem, as community change founder Horace Seldon said, then anti-racist organizers must go where the white people are, the suburbs. Melrose, Massachusetts, 2017. A small group of white neighbors had just finished a workshop called White People Challenging Racism. They were focused on moving from talk to action. But in a town with a population around 90% white, with fewer than 30 Black residents, what exactly was the right role for Melrose's white people to play? So the group reached out to Stewart-Bouley, CCI's executive director, and Abba Taylor, the executive director of an organization in Winchester, Massachusetts, now known as the Network for Social Justice. And the two groups came together on a project they still share today called Anti-Racism Organizing in the Suburbs. They helped the volunteers discover that the key problem to tackle was the racial isolation of the suburbs themselves. After all, it's urban redlining and suburban zoning that are at the root of so many of the disparities of racism. Far from being powerless to bring about change, white suburbia is where power is concentrated. They imagined an event that was more than just another anti-racism symposium. It was a conference about organizing. Bring different suburbs together, build relationships, and learn from each other's efforts. More than 100 people from all over the metropolitan area convened. Representatives from campaigns led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color presented on the issues they were fighting for. Participants in the training learned how to support those campaigns and organizing efforts. CCI provided strategic and technical support to this group of volunteers. CCI also partnered with towns to the west of Boston to present another day-long event, this one hosted at Regis College in Weston, Massachusetts. Northern New England convened in Biddeford, Maine. And in the pandemic era, a virtual Eros is keeping the work going. New groups of leaders are learning the skills they need to organize in the suburbs. The demand for this training is exciting. The challenge is capacity. Eros has proven to be an effective way to activate power and privilege toward anti-racist action. Investing in this program will help CCI connect even more people and resources from predominantly white communities in service of BIPOC organizing. People in the suburbs have been organizing in isolation. Eros is an innovative tool to change that.
Hi, my name's Delilah Papour, and I'm here in Biddeford, Maine. Thank you so much for giving me a chance to be here tonight to talk about a CCI program that made a big difference to me, is making a big difference to me, and is having an impact on anti-racist organizing in Maine. CCI formed Eros, anti-racist organizing in the suburbs, to make it clear that white people have a role in dismantling racism by learning together, following Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and organizing and taking collective action. In Maine, it's not just the suburbs where white people congregate and concentrate. Maine has the highest percentage of white people in any state in the US. And in Maine, you hear this is the way life should be. You hear racism isn't a problem because there aren't any people of color or many people of color. And 2 weeks ago, our US Senator, Susan Collins, said that systemic racism is not a problem in the state of Maine. We have a lot of work to do. And amidst, you know, the beauty of the ocean here and the rocky shores and the mountains, and on this indigenous land that is now occupied, the air is filled with individualism, isolation, white silence, mistreatment of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and the myth of no racism. That's what fills the air. And when I met Stewart-Bouley, I met a Black woman who was committed, obviously, to calling out that stifling, constricting air for what it is, white supremacy. And in Biddeford and Saco, individuals have been able to stand up to racism at certain points and learn together at certain points, but it's been resisting in isolation. And in my experience, it really wasn't until the Eros conference here last year in 2019 that you could feel a shift. I could feel a shift in the air. We received training and then a lot of organizing support from CCI. And I feel like that was essential to ready us for 2020. Then in 2020, galvanized by George Floyd's dying breath and led by Black Lives Matter organizations across the country and in Portland, white people committed to anti-racism in Maine, small towns have been able to find each other, learn together, and begin to organize to have collective impact. There are now 5 surge chapters in the state of Maine, and there were 1 before the AROS conference last year. With support from Francesca Smith, we are building unity with more organizations, and we're supporting the Black Lives Matter protests. We're demanding defunding of police and defending election rights, with more to come. So I wanted to come tonight to say thank you to CCI for the AROS inspiration and your ongoing work in Maine, and to say that we will continue here until the air in Maine is fit for all to breathe. I hope you'll join me in supporting CCI, particularly for their work with AROS. Thank you.
I met this year's keynote, Dr. Atia Martin, several years ago when she was serving in her role as Boston's first resilience officer. And I was immediately struck by the fact that despite a background that is beyond impressive, and let me just say, I got to just throw out, like, she speaks Serbian and Croatian, and I mean, she's got this amazing background. How utterly accessible Dr. Martin is. When we met, it felt like we had known each other for years. And she was instantly someone who I wanted to get to know better, but the schedule conflicts were real. Dr. Martin graciously emceed our 50th anniversary event in 2018. And I knew then at that time I had to have her back as a keynote. And now we have her as a keynote tonight. In this moment, with her own story of uprising, that led her not just to this moment with us, but with the founding of her own organization, All Aces. I'm so delighted to have Dr. Martin with us tonight, and I believe her voice is exactly what we all need in this moment. I know that the speakers' bios are available on the app, but I did just want to briefly mention Dr. Martin's work with All Aces. It's an alternative to more of the traditional diversity, equity, and inclusion work that's happening out there. And I just want to say specifically about her work with her show, with her organization. She does an online show where I had the pleasure of being a guest a few weeks ago. And in preparing to go on that show, I had a chance to meet with Dr. Martin's team, and I was struck by how much of her approach to the work is so similar to CCI's. It's across racial and class lines. As we talked, I think at some point during our time on the air, this work can't be done in isolation. And while we must have leaders of color, we also have to have white folks in the work as well. So at this point, I'm not going to bore you and ramble because I want to hear our next keynote. I want to hear our keynote, Dr. Atia Martin. So Dr. Martin, take it away. And thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you for having me. It is such a pleasure to be with you all today, this beautiful evening. Thank you, Shay. I feel the same way about you. I think you are an amazing human being. I think your strength and vulnerability, which is part of strength, is beautiful. And I really appreciate your support of All Aces as well, being on our show. I want to say thank you to everyone who's here. It's a pleasure to see all of you. And really tonight, I want to do a couple of things. So first, share a little bit about my own struggles and challenges with trying to figure out how to navigate in a society that's not designed to see me as fully human, right? To see my children as fully human, to navigate and figure out how to be in predominantly white spaces and still hold on to myself and my values and my culture as I'm in the middle of these seas of conformity, right? Where everyone is trying to get you to be something that they want you to be and not who you are. And what's interesting about that to me is it's a shared struggle that people of color have with white people. This sense of conformity. And in a lot of the psychological and social science research, people will talk a lot about what is it that is most dangerous to our mental health. And there are several things that have continued to pop up. Number one is conformity, right? The pull in our human develop to conform ourselves, to mold ourselves into boxes and circles that we don't actually fit in, that none of us fit in. And so I want to sit there for a little bit. And then the second thing I want to do is just tap into this sense of partnership, this sense of shared struggle, this sense of ownership, this sense of our power and our responsibilities as people who are part of the system that we're trying to dismantle, right? So the system is not something separate from us. And so this idea of what are the things that the nerds in the psychology and sociology world say. So I said conformity. The other thing is this sense of consumption, right? This idea that we are taking in so much that we didn't create, so much that other people have molded for us, that in many ways reinforces the conformity that is the other part of why this work is so hard. And then the other piece is kind of the human tendencies, right? This third area is a lack of self-awareness and management. We have so many struggles as people to just learn how to navigate ourselves. I wish that someone taught me in school why it is that I do the things that I do. Why is it that I struggle to get up and do the things that are most important to me every day? Why is it that when I'm engaging with other people, I behave in certain ways? What are the skills and tools and strategies in order for me to be in the world, to be in space with other people, and again, hold on to myself, but also allow other people to be who they are, to respect where they are on their journey, and not focus my energy on things that I cannot control. And so as I have evolved, as I have grown, as I have been in so many different arenas, whether it's federal government, whether it's city government, whether it's the private sector, before government, including nonprofits, and now my own business and building a team and building an organizational culture. These are all of the things that I have come to appreciate, things that I didn't appreciate as much before. I couldn't understand because you don't know what you don't know. And when it comes to racism, one of the biggest challenges is that we ultimately, all of us have been planted with the seeds of whiteness and anti-Blackness, right? And that people of color, specifically kind of BIPOC, right? Black, Indigenous, and people of color are really struggling because of the way that we've structured our society. These seeds that have been planted in us of anti-Blackness really are not unique to the United States, right? Black people in America and across the world are really the symbols of the other. No matter where you go on earth, if you're Black or you can be associated with Blackness in any kind of way, whether it's your complexion, whether it's how you behave, all types of things, then somehow you are lesser than, you're flawed, something's wrong with you. And I want to note that our Indigenous brothers and sisters have been the international symbols of erasure as a method, as an approach to be able to justify the injustices of taking their land, displacing them, taking over, trying to shift their identity as well. And so as we think about where there are these opportunities for us to be different, and not just be different for the sake of being different, but be different from what whiteness and anti-Blackness has placed inside of us, to decide for ourselves who we want to be in the world. And that is not easy. And I don't want to make it seem like it's easy, because it's hard, because the work, as was mentioned before, the work of racial equity and social justice is the work of getting closer to who we really are. It's the work of figuring out your sense of self, figuring out, in spite of all the things, all the molds, all those boxes, all those circles, despite all of that, that we actually have a right, a place, no matter where we go, no matter who we are, to be who we are, to be who we want to be, to figure out what that is. That's a journey. And part of that journey of figuring out who we are and who we want to be and what's the difference and how we close that gap really is the part of that journey of being able to be closer to each other. Because I cannot be in a healthy relationship with someone who hasn't fully gone on that journey to be their own person. That is going to result in some awkward dynamics, right? And I still have to figure out, for me as a person, how do I enter into healthy relationships with people who look like me, in spite of the seeds that have been planted in me? How do I interact with white people who are also on a spectrum of their own development, and hold on to myself and respect their humanity? How do I make sure that as I am struggling with my own challenges, that I'm being honest with myself, that I am actually still struggling with some things? Because it is in owning the fact that I, as a Black woman who identifies as African American, my family has been here for generations. My great grandmother was my great great grandmother was a sharecropper, and I met her, and her parents were enslaved Black people. So I was one generation away from slavery. And so as I think about my own journey, my own struggles, being honest with myself about where I am and all of the different challenges that racism has presented for me, I also came to a recognition that in addition to the seeds that have been planted in me with whiteness and anti-Blackness, that we've also been planted with these seeds of dysfunctional thinking and behavior. This dysfunctional thinking that says that things are all or nothing. Everything's black or white. Everything is this or that. These cognitive distortions is what the nerds call it. These cognitive distortions actually are very much aligned with what we see in what they call the characteristics or the traits of white supremacy culture. In other words, the things that have been taught to us through whiteness are the same things that lead to anxiety, depression, and other mental health disorders. Racism is getting all of us sick. And there are certain knowledge, skills, and tools that we need in order to get ourselves healthy and keep ourselves healthy, so that we can be in healthy relationships with one another. So that when we're in organizations, which are not random buildings or inanimate objects, they're actually people. Organizations are made up of people. That when we're in these spaces together, that we can function in ways that are more healthy. Because when you have these seeds of unhealthy and dysfunctional thinking and behavior, and you layer racism on top of it, it means that people of color, particularly BIPOC folks, are receiving not only the dysfunction from society that racism has infected us with, they're also getting the individual dysfunction every day. So when we talk about microaggressions, let's be clear what we're talking about. We're talking about a function of sickness. We're talking about a function of behavior that is the opposite of the behavior that we know helps people to be healthy, helps people to be resilient. And part of our resilience is also about the relationships that we are able to connect the dots between, the relationships that we are able to bring our respective power together in space so that we can advocate together, so that we can amplify our power, to shift the dynamics of how we're navigating, how we're thinking, how we're behaving, owning our power in all of this. And I don't mean the traditional ways we think about power. I mean this theme I've been talking about of self-awareness, self-management. Owning that power means that we have to own all that comes with who we are. It means that we have to own the dysfunction, we have to own the amazingness, and that all of those things can exist in one human being, that we can be flawed and be amazing people, that they're not mutually exclusive. The work is, how do we close that gap as much as possible? How do we build the skills? And so here's some tangible skills that we found at All Aces, and I found in my personal life, that have really been helpful for me. So number one is racial equity literacy, understanding what racism is, how it works, how it's impacting us, how our organizations are impacted by it. Also understanding what racial equity is, and that it's not only about the outcomes, it's also the process that we go through to rehumanize ourselves and others, to rehumanize each other, to rehumanize our organizations, to reach our full potential. That is the process. To reach our full human potential, we need to understand these pieces. So this understanding what it means to advance racial equity is really connected to these other skills that I'm going to mention. The other one is emotional intelligence, which is partly self-awareness and self-management, but it's also the awareness of other people, really seeing other people, not just with our eyes, but acknowledging their presence, their identity, all of who they are, and not assuming that we know it, but getting to know, learning, which gets to the next skill is communication. Our ability to be in healthy relationships with each other requires us to be able to communicate with ourselves, communicate with each other. The other skill is conflict management. Conflict is healthy, it's important, it's good, it's a clarifier. It's a thing that we run from, though. We avoid it, which is one of the many symptoms that we're talking about, right? But conflict is important. It helps us get to know each other better, what our boundaries are. And if we never enter into it, we never know. The other skill is critical thinking. How do we make sure that we have a process to manage our thinking, because it is flawed, because it's driven by our emotions, which is why emotional intelligence is so important. So when we are able to build the skills that help us have an actual process for how we think about things and challenge ourselves and challenge other people, that is the penultimate of our ability to be in space with each other, to be in space with love and accountability. And I'll land here in saying that many of the challenges that we face in our ability to be in relationship with each other are related to traits of codependency. And I won't get into the weeds because I've already got my warning, and I'm at that mark. I'm boundary crossing right now. But that said, those traits of codependency are important because it includes denial. It includes low self-esteem. It includes compliance, going along with things that we don't really believe in. It includes avoiding conflict. And it includes control, trying to control others, usually through blame and shame. So I share that with you as a way to say this, that I hope that tonight you're having an amazing time, and that in the spirit of uprising, that you feel the sense of liberation that comes from exploring that unknown wilderness that is who we are and who we can be, and how so much of that is within our actual control. And for us to spend more time reflecting internally on what we can be doing, or what we might be doing to contribute to the system of racism, so that we can shift our behavior, shift our thinking. That said, we spend way too much time facing outwardly and focusing on what everybody else is doing. So my hope is that you have a personal uprising that helps you get closer to you, that helps you get closer to racial equity, that helps you to get closer to social justice. We are all struggling. Life is real. And I hope that we're able to get closer to ourselves and closer to each other. So thank you very much. I appreciate you all, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the evening.
Community change has always been about bringing people together to take action against racism. But people coming together isn't always easy. The more different the people are, the harder it is. Mirna is program director for CCI, while Abraham is co-chair of CCI's board of directors. They are unlikely friends in today's America, different across race, gender, class, and power. And their relationship began with an unlikely opening line.
Myrna said, "I don't trust you." And it was the beginning of our connection.
Can I just say though, like, you took it really well.
What's that?
When I told you I didn't trust you.
Oh. You were willing to extend me a little bit of trust by saying I don't trust you, because if you really didn't trust me, you wouldn't bother telling me, I think.
I was like, well, I guess if I tell somebody something, if I tell somebody that their breath stink, and then they're like, well, I don't know how to brush my teeth. And I'm like, I guess I gotta show you how to brush your teeth, right?
Because white people don't know.
Right, go into that, yes.
You were saying I don't trust you, and then you offered to meet up.
They talked more. Their friendship developed.
I find it is extremely rare that someone has a commitment to telling the truth.
Particularly white folks, because they hold so much power, their learning curve is gonna be particularly painful to not just themselves, but to the people around them.
And I think Abraham has been dealing with that head on.
They began to wonder, could community change build on what they were discovering and share it with others?
We both want to be free. We can't do it without one another. For us, our relationship became an experiment.
They developed a theory of change. Offer people from marginalized communities the chance to build their political leadership. At the same time, help white people heal their relationship with money and power and learn to embrace reparations.
The challenge is creating the container for each of those people to actually be able to sit at a table, and I feel like that's at the DNA of the Racial Healing Project.
Mirna had been working with the Massachusetts Coalition of Domestic Workers, a small nonprofit that focuses on political organizing of domestic workers. She proposed introducing them to Abraham.
We believe that if that space is there and we have space for domestic workers to be getting trained up and building their political leadership, that brilliance that they come with can be in reciprocity with these white people.
It was incredible to watch. You would show up and always let yourself be emotionally impacted by their story, allowed them to, or helps folks to stand in their truth further.
So it's like we're all in for a heavy emotional lift, but what I felt that we create is a clarity that it's worth it. To me now, I get it, but I wouldn't get it if it weren't for our relationship and you calling me into action in that way.
It's right, it ends with actually action, and action is what is your story of sacrifice? What are you giving to the movement and not expecting back?
Hola, buenas noches.
Hi, good evening.
Mi nombre es Mayra y pertenezco a Massachusetts Coalición de las Trabajadoras del Hogar.
My name is Myra. I belong to Massachusetts Coalition of Domestic Workers.
Muy agradecida por haberme invitado ahora a estar con ustedes.
I'm very grateful to have been invited to be with you now with you.
Yo represento a todas las trabajadoras del hogar del estado de Massachusetts. Son 65,000 mujeres que están afuera siendo discriminadas.
I represent all the domestic workers of Massachusetts. There's 65,000 women out there who are being discriminated against.
Siempre tenemos que soportar la discriminación por ser una trabajadora del hogar, por venir de otros países, emigrar, no saber inglés, el idioma esencial y primero de este país.
We've always had to tolerate being discriminated against for being domestic workers, for being immigrants, for being people who don't speak English, which is the language of this country.
Siempre nos quieren ver como un poco de menos por ser inmigrante, porque trabajamos limpiando casas, empezando desde el salario que recibimos.
They always want to look at us as less because we immigrants working at cleaning houses because of the pay rate that we receive.
Yo creo que ya es tiempo de que esto se ponga un alto a lo que es el racismo en este país y al menos con nosotros las trabajadoras del hogar.
I think it's about time we put a stop to racism in this country, and no less when it comes to us, domestic workers.
Y junto con ustedes sé que vamos a lograr esto porque tenemos que estar siempre unidos y como hemos visto ahora de la pandemia no vio raza, no vio color, no vio tamaño.
And I'm sure we'll do it because we're in this fight with you together. And in regards to the pandemic as well, that did not view race, it did not view color, it did not view your size.
Y yo creo que el ser humano, más de este país, lo que es la raza blanca, siempre nos quieren ver a nosotros como un poco, como más de menos en realidad, por ser, como les digo, una trabajadora del hogar. Y yo creo que ya no estamos en los tiempos de antes de la esclavitud para que esto exista todavía en este país.
And it's the way of things that the white race, so to speak, would see us as workers, domestic workers, as being less, as a sort of a reflection of how things must have been in this country in times of old before slavery.
Y lastimosamente con el gobierno que tenemos actualmente colaboró más para hacer que nosotros seamos más discriminadas en cuanto a ser una persona inmigrante, más cuando llegamos a este país no sabemos a qué monstruo nos venimos a enfrentar.
And unfortunately, the current government has collaborated more, has taken steps so that we would be more discriminated. Taking into account that when we got here, we did not know what we were going to be facing living here.
Entonces, lo que tenemos que hacer ahora juntos todos nosotros es luchar para que esto ya no siga, para que ya nos vean como cualquier persona en este país.
And so what we've got to do is we got to get together and fight now so that this no longer happens, so that we can be seen just as any other person in this country.
Todos juntos agarrados de la mano tenemos que hacer un gran trabajo porque afuera hay demasiadas personas que están siendo discriminadas por el color, por ser una persona inmigrante, por llegar y decirnos que les quitamos su trabajo.
Mm-hmm. We've got to get together hand in hand because there are too many people out there who are being discriminated against because of their color, because they are immigrants, because people think that they've come to take their jobs.
Junto con las organizaciones unidas Tenemos que trabajar en esto todos
with all the other organizations united. We've all got to be working in this.
porque para eso nosotros estamos para ayudarle. Cuando nosotros ya sabemos de lo que tenemos derecho en este país, no importa que seamos personas inmigrantes, nosotros tratamos de ayudarle a las mujeres que están afuera.
Because and we're here to help and to support that, because we know that, well, when it comes to having the rights of anyone else, we will be there always to support the women who are on the outside.
Porque todavía hay mucha mujer que está muy ignorante y aguantando lo que es el racismo dentro de una casa, trabajando o limpiando como nani o limpiando una casa.
Because there are a lot of women who don't know their rights, who are still working in conditions, working as a nanny or working as a caretaker or working cleaning a house.
Ya es tiempo que nos escuchen y levantemos la voz.
It's time that they hear us, that we lift our voices up.
Y sé que juntos lo vamos a lograr, que pare el racismo.
And together, I know we will achieve that, the stopping of racism.
Porque yo fui una mujer que tuve mucha discriminación en los lugares de trabajo cuando estuve dentro de una casa trabajando por muchas horas y por un salario mal pagado, y lo tenía que aguantar porque estaba y necesitaba el trabajo.
Because I faced a lot of discrimination when I was working in a house, with working long hours, and working at an inadequate rate because I needed it. I needed to work.
¿Dónde está donde dicen que este es un país libre, un país de que no hay discriminación, pero sabemos que hay demasiada discriminación más con la raza blanca?
They say that this is a country that's free of racism and discrimination, but we know that there is a lot of discrimination, most of all with the white race.
Vamos a otro estado, como digamos, vamos a New Hampshire. Allí desde el momento que nos ven que somos una persona hispana, nos quieren ver de mal o no nos quieren vender lo que queremos comprar.
When we go to the state of New Hampshire, they see that we are Hispanic, and they either see us, in a bad way, or they don't want to sell us the things that we've come to buy.
Hasta nos da miedo ir al estado de New Hampshire o de Vermont porque sabemos que es un estado blanco.
We get afraid of even just going to the states of New Hampshire and Vermont because we know that these are white states.
Ahora es mi voz para las mujeres también, de las trabajadoras del hogar, para que nos escuchen y para que nos sepan que no estamos aquí y ellas sepan también que no están solas, que por eso estamos todas las organizaciones juntos para poderles ayudar y que ellas levanten su voz.
Well, that may the domestic workers know, may the workers know that we are here, and may they know that we are all working together, in this regard, and so that they may all raise their voice.
Sigamos adelante. Quiero que sigamos, que nos apoyen, porque la verdad que es lo que necesitamos, apoyo de ustedes para que nosotros agarremos una gran fuerza y sintamos que no estamos solas.
And please continue supporting us. That's what we need, is support in order to keep going forward. Let's keep moving forward. And in that way, we will be able to put a stronger foot forward, and go further in what we're trying to do.
Porque la verdad que lo que es el racismo no tiene que existir más en este país, como ya se los he dicho. Hay que ponerle un stop a esto. Ya es demasiado lo que hacen con nosotros como trabajadores del hogar y como cualquier persona que trabaja en este país por ser inmigrante.
Because, as I was saying before, it's time to put a stop to racism. We can stop this, when it comes to being a person of color and being an immigrant in this country.
Porque aquí venimos a trabajar, a luchar por nuestras familias que dejamos en nuestro país. No venimos a dar problemas a nadie para que nos quieran ver como peor que un animalito.
We came here struggling, to work, to help our families. We didn't come here so that we could be seen as less than an animal.
Porque a este país no es fácil llegar. Desde el momento que salimos de nuestro país, sabemos de que podemos dejar hasta nuestras vidas en ese desierto, en ese río.
It wasn't easy coming here. We knew when we started the journey here, we could lose our lives in the desert, in the rivers.
Muchos tenemos la dicha de llegar, otros se quedan en el camino, otros que no los encuentran. Y todavía en vez de cuando se encuentra uno con la patrulla fronteriza, eso hay más discriminación por ellos.
Many people get here, many people turn back, others are never found. And once you get in touch with there's a police patrol. We know when we see that there's going to be more discrimination at their hands.
Por eso es que ahora tenemos que estar unidos como siempre. Y yo siempre le he dicho y siempre pelearé por estar juntos y que el racismo termine en este país.
That's why we've got to be together. And that's why I will always fight together with you all that racism can be defeated and stopped in this country.
Sé que tenemos que ser valientes y fuertes para estar siempre en la lucha y sé que vamos a llegar a lograr todo lo que queremos.
I know we have to be strong and courageous in the struggle, and I know that we will achieve all that we want to.
Gracias y buenas noches.
Thank you and good night.
All right. Muchas gracias, Mayra, por estar aquí, por compartir las palabras. Hello, everyone. My name's Abraham Latiner. I'm co-chair of CCI's board of directors, and we are moving on to our Drylongso Award, where we are honoring little known and little recognized people who are fighting for racial justice every day. And tonight we have a special award for our board co-chair, Sue Neymark, who I've had the pleasure of working with Sue for the past 5 years on the board. And tonight is a big occasion because after 19 years, Sue is stepping down from the board. That's right. Sue has been on our board for 19 years. And Sue, this is a bittersweet moment for me because I celebrate your clarity about knowing that it was time for you to say, okay, I'm stepping down after so many years of service. But it's also really difficult to imagine CCI without you. So for those of you that know us and those of you that don't, CCI is a tiny nonprofit with a tiny budget. And we've always had to rely on a very active board to stay afloat in the midst of the nonprofit industrial complex that we exist in. Sue, you have been so central at keeping the engine of CCI running for 54 years. And you've allowed us to get to where we are today, even with all the challenges we've faced. And so as you step down from service, Sue, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for paving the way for CCI to be what we are and what we're becoming today. So we want to take a moment to read some more words of gratitude towards you, Sue, for your service, which we'll see on the screen here.
Wow. Thank you. Elder, I don't feel like an elder.
Well, you're not, but to me, you play that role, but it doesn't mean you have to say it. But for me, I get to say that I look to you in that way. So thank you so much, Sue, for all you've given. And I think we have some virtual flowers to give you.
And
amazing.
ah,
So now we'll pass the mic to you, Sue, to say a few words.
and I got the real flowers in the mail today. So thank you, everybody. Yeah, so, we often refer to community change as the watering hole. I think we started with that, and that is what it's been for me for 20 years. You've heard how long I've served on the board. This is not best practice because it doesn't really make a space for new leadership. So please don't follow my lead on that. So tonight's about movement building and leadership. And I've given a lot of thought to leadership, especially as a white woman doing work around racism and white supremacy. It's like threading the eye of a needle, finding that space where I can have an impact while making space for Black, Indigenous, people of color, and others to lead who are closest to the pain. So thinking about where my juice for this work comes from, I'd like to call in my dad, Norm Naimark. I know some of you on the call have met him, and he's with me tonight on the proverbial stage. My dad grew up in Detroit during the Depression, a working class son of immigrants. And when white families fled the city for the suburbs in the 1960s and 70s, my dad reached out to the A. Philip Randolph Institute to build bridges between the Black and Jewish communities in Detroit. At the dinner table, he would rail, "It's not right the way the Jewish community is turning its back on the back on the city." And in the 1960s, he helped lead coalitions to organize support for the Federal Fair Housing Act, and again in the 1980s for its expansion. When I was a kid, I remember him coming to the dinner table one day and holding up a piece of Kleenex to me and my 3 siblings. And he said, "This Kleenex has been sitting on the dining room floor for 2 days, and every single one of you have walked over it, and none of you picked it up. It doesn't matter who dropped it. It's all of your responsibilities to pick it up." And then he would say things like, "You should respect people who speak English with an accent because it means they know more than one language." He once told me he was an iconoclast, and he made me look up the word in the dictionary. And if you don't know what that is, you can look it up after this event. He passed away in 2006. And when I was sorting through his papers, I found a letter to my dad from the A. Philip Randolph Institute, and it was addressed to Brother Norm. I'm proud of this legacy. He was always a humble man, an underdog. He didn't see himself as a leader, just someone with strong social justice values trying to do the right thing. And that's kind of how I think about leadership. So CCI has been my other family, feels like for almost as long as my dad. I went through my CCI papers to think about what I might say tonight. And I found notes from a meeting held in October 2003 at Simmons College on the topic of building a white anti-racist movement in Boston. That was 17 years ago. You could say we were outliers back then because there weren't a lot of people talking about white anti-racist movements back then. And then here we are now in the current state of affairs with the elections and the pandemic and the uprisings against systemic racism. So everyone's an activist now all of a sudden. And the question that I get asked all the time is, will it stick, especially with white people? So my work going forward is figuring out how to deal with the 70 million people who just voted for white supremacy and racism. Not with all of them, but the ones who might be open to learning a different narrative. I'm not sure what that'll look like yet, but I am sure that there's no turning back. There's a lot of people out there that are looking for a new storyline to make sense of what's going on around them. I was at the Virtual Facing Race Conference this week, which is always an inspiring event. In one of the breakouts, the panelists were asked what they make of the current moment. Cristina Jimenez, who's the co-founder and executive director of United We Dream, responded with these words that I want to share with you. She said, "This is not a moment, it's a movement. It's a movement of movements. And it isn't spontaneous combustion, it's the buildup of all the work of many decades of organizing." So I'm proud to have been associated with an organization that's been part of these decades of organizing. And I'd love to name all the people who've contributed to my own upbringing around racism, but we would be here all night. I'm not going to do that to you. But I do want to give a shout out to Jimmy Two Feathers, who I think is here in the room, for co-chairing the Community Change Board with me before Abraham. And now Abraham for carrying the torch to the next chapter. I'm thrilled with the next generation of leadership that's stepping up at CCI, at Surge Boston, and really all over the country. We've joked that lots of people want to join in anti-racism work these days, but nobody wants to be in the engine room, taking on the less glamorous work of managing the board of directors month to month. So I'm here tonight to hand over the proverbial keys to the engine room to Abraham. And I do want to say that we're looking for others to join the CCI board, especially any of you willing to join Abraham in the engine room. I'm not disappearing, at least not yet. So please get in touch with me or Abraham if that interests you. And lastly, I want to thank Shay, whose commitment to this work has made it possible to get to where we are today. This year has been tough on everybody, and even tougher on Black and working class people, and Shay is no exception to that. She's not only hung in, but she's stabilized and grown CCI even in the midst of this pandemic and in her own personal life changes and challenges that she spoke about earlier. I've personally learned and grown in our relationship and know that CCI is in good hands moving forward. So the work ahead, it's going to be hard, precisely because we're so close to the kind of transformation this country has needed. The forces of white supremacy wouldn't be fighting so hard if they thought they were winning. So let's all keep dreaming and doing the work to build that dream in the months and years ahead. And thank you.
Thank you, Sue. I knew there was something that I was forgetting this week. I had meant to write something and I didn't. So thank you. I'm just going to say that in the 7 years that I've been a part of CCI, you have been a friend, you've been a sounding board, and you've been a bit of a mentor. So I'm not going to lie, it's bittersweet to see you leave in a year that, as you know, has brought a lot of loss for me. And yet all things, you know, we must move on. So I look forward to seeing how you continue to connect with us. Thank you. On that note, it is time to close things out a little bit. And I just have a couple of more words that I want to share. While this year's event is virtual, our work remains the same. As you heard everyone speak about the projects that we've been a part of, the work still remains the same. It just looks a little bit different now that we're all on these screens together. As you know, even with the change in leadership that's heading our way, the need to dismantle white supremacy remains the same. 2020 showed us all just how insidious white supremacy is. And the fact is, it's not just a threat to Black and brown-bodied people, it's a threat to everyone. While we gather annually to celebrate our work, to celebrate the unsung heroes of the work, the reality is that this event also serves as our largest single fundraiser. And even in a pandemic, that fact still remains unchanged. To keep the work moving, we need your help. And I would ask that if you have the means, consider a financial gift now to help us meet our event fundraising goal of $70,000. You can make a gift online at our website, www.communitychangeinc.org, or you can mail a gift to our office. If you can't make a gift tonight, please make a gift when our year-end appeal goes out in a few weeks. If you remain untouched by this economic crisis, consider a gift tonight and in a few weeks. One of the things that's really unique about CCI, that is very unique as I'm learning the longer I serve as our executive director, over 90% of our operating funds comes from individuals. not grant funding. We're one of the rare nonprofits that we receive virtually little support in terms of traditional foundations, because traditional foundations are often steeped in white supremacy, and our metrics are not metrics that they can use, which means that we rely on our friends to make sure that we can continue this work. So what else do I want you to do in addition to a financial gift? I want you to get involved. Like, I actually really want you to get involved. Connect with Arrows. Connect with Knapsack or Surge or WPCR. I want you to find an anti-racism home within the CCI family so that you can be in nourishing and accountable relationships as you do this work. We need you in this work, and we need you in this work now. As for the rest of the evening, while the main program is over, and true to the CCI way of doing things, even in the virtual world, we ran a little bit over. If you've gone to any of our events in real time back in the what I now call the before world, we always seem to somehow run a little bit over. And I thought tonight, certainly that wasn't going to happen. But some things have to stay the same, even if we are in our own homes. We ran a little bit late. But the rest of the evening, if you have the capacity, is to join us in one of the virtual studios. You can go to your app, you can look at the selections. The virtual studios will go on for about a half an hour. Each one is for 15 minutes. You've got a great selection of things to join us in. So hopefully you will continue joining us for another 30 minutes if you have the capacity. I'll be in the mixologist room with Mr. Bruce Irving, Debbie Irving's husband, and Johnny Lapham, and we'll be coming up with some really good drinks to help you deal with white supremacy and racism in your lives. So thank you for joining us tonight. Good night. Oops, I missed that part. Oh, it looks like the rooms, if I'm still on, will switch at 8:40. Well, they're going to switch now, and then they'll switch again at 8:40. Thank you.